So did you know there is something that every one of us in this room have in common? Well, there's a few things that all of us have in common. Every one of us was born. Seriously. Every one of us. Every one of us at one point in our lives, we were kids. It's always interesting to me when I go to a restaurant, especially when my kids were younger and one of them would be crying or acting up or something like that, and there was always somebody there that didn't have kids, and they would look at us, and you just feel this like weight of like, oh, we're so annoying to them. And I would have these thoughts, they don't remember what it was like to be a kid. They don't remember what it was like for themselves to be kids. We've all been kids. We've all been middle school aged as well. That awkward time of life sometimes. We've all also been teenagers. Every single one of us in this room has been a teenager at some point in our lives. We all have that in common. And I would venture to say, I would almost bet that most of us remember, maybe not all of us, but most of us remember what it was like to have health class. Do you remember health class? I remember health class. I remember it was the sophomore year. It was the summer between my sophomore and junior year of high school. Me and my buddy, he lived a couple of houses down from me on my street. We decided we wanted some extra credit, and we wanted to get ahead, for the next year so that we could, get all the stuff done that we needed to do. And so we decided we were going to take some summer school classes. And one of the classes he and I decided we would take, I don't know what we were thinking, but we decided we would take health class in the middle of summer. And out of all 20 of those students, if I remember this right, he and I were the only two that were guys in a room full of girls. You say that now. But at the moment when there were just two of us, and nobody wanted to talk about sex, nobody wanted to talk about our bodies. Everybody thought it was funny and embarrassing and goofy, and there were some funny things. I mean, there were some really weird videos that they showed us, right? It was always awkward. But one of the things I remember about the approach that they took in class was that it was all about feelings. It was all about this idea that everything about us was out of control. And that there was really nothing we could do to control it. That we just had to do some different things to try to feed the craving that we had. And there was just this kind of known idea that everybody was doing it with everybody, and it's just the way it was, and that's just the way life is. And so there's nothing you can do but just go along with it and try to protect yourself from some of the diseases that were out there. All about your feelings. All about the feelings that drive your craving. All about taking care of your need, and you can't help your feelings, just take care of you. Give into it, and it's okay. So there was that approach to sexual intimacy that I was introduced to at a very young age. But there was another approach, another organization, another piece of my life that also had an approach to this idea of sexual intimacy. It was the church. And you can only imagine how good those conversations were. You see, in the church, there was this almost this approach to it that, we don't talk about it, we don't deal with it, just don't do it. Right? It's like total opposite of Nike. Just don't do it. And it was interesting at times, I can remember looking back, it seemed as though the church, and I'm talking about the church in general, was so consumed and preoccupied with being so anti-sex that I began to wonder, why are you always talking about it like that? Why are you always consumed by it? And at the end of the day, a lot of people came to the conclusion that the way church viewed sex, this idea that it was only supposed to be done in marriage, kind of left you thinking that the joy of sex, when you go to church, that's where the joy of sex goes to die. That really was. What if there's a better way than both of those approaches? A better way than pop culture and society. A better way from being afraid to talk about it and deal with it. You see, both approaches have left a wake of broken hearts all over the place. This very vulnerable piece of us, this very important part of who we are. A lot of people have experienced incredible brokenness as a result of not knowing what to do with it, of not talking about it, of not dealing with it, of running away from it, of hiding from it, of pushing it down, ignoring it. Broken hearts. People have felt used and abused by it. People have felt shame and guilt for wanting to have sexual intimacy. There's got to be a better way. What if instead of seeing it as a part of us that is out of control, instead of seeing it as though we exist simply to meet our own cravings and desires, what if we looked at it in a totally different way? What if we approach sexual intimacy as a gift from God? A gift of creation. A gift of joy. A life-giving gift. The very first time that sexual intimacy and sex is even dealt with is in the creation story. Genesis chapter 2, verse 24. Listen to these words. This explains why a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one. Now the man and his wife were both naked, but they felt no shame. Obviously, sexual intimacy is important to God. Obviously, it matters to Him so much so that it even has a place in the story of creation. Right there, in the very beginning, God creates us with this craving. Right there in the beginning, it has a place in the order. It has a place in the bigger picture. God creates a way for humans to continue on existing even past the creation story. The craving in us for sexual intimacy is actually meant to draw us outside of ourselves. The craving in us for sexual intimacy is actually meant to draw us outside of ourselves. It's what moves us out of our mom and dad's house. All right? The craving for sexual intimacy. But society has it all backwards. There's this idea that the cravings we have are meant to serve our needs and meet our needs. There's this idea that the goal of dating someone, right, a couple of times, and on the third date, you get lucky, right? That our happiness is based on what we can get from another person instead of what we can give. There's something wrong with that. See, we are more than our cravings. We are more than our cravings. I think I have a slide for this. We are created spiritual beings who have the ability to co-create. We are more than our cravings. We are created spiritual beings who have the ability to co-create. Part of why we have these cravings is to help us to want to co-create life. Even when we have to change the diapers, even when the baby keeps us up all night, even when they talk back to us, this craving is ultimately meant to help us. One of the ways is meant to help us create more of those babies. And while not everyone wants to have kids, and while not everyone can have kids, one of the purposes that we have this craving is for us to continue on co-creating life. But probably one of the most important reasons that we have this craving in us, one that we can all relate to, is the incredible bonding that occurs during sexual intimacy. Adam Hamilton, in the book I've been using as a resource for this series, writes, "Sexual intimacy binds our bodies together in an embrace meant to create an emotional bond that deepens our love and affection for one another." There's actually chemicals that are released in our brains during sexual intimacy. One of those chemicals is oxytocin, or the cuddle or love hormone. This same hormone is released as when a mother is giving birth or nursing a baby. Isn't that interesting? Another chemical that's released in our brain is vasopressin, a hormone released in mammals that is meant to give us a sense of bonding. As created beings, we have these chemicals. Isn't that amazing how they're released at the right time to help us feel connected to the one that we are giving our most vulnerable part to? They're meant to help us grow closer to each other. And as we grow closer to each other, we are to know each other, to know the deepest part of the other person. Interesting, in Genesis 4 in the Old Testament, it says that Adam knew his wife. The word know is a euphemism for sex. The Hebrew word for know is yada. You ever watch Seinfeld? I don't know if anybody's ever watched Seinfeld. There's an episode where they're like, yada, 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 yada. I don't know if that's what they're talking about, but maybe it is. Marriage, you see, there's nothing like knowing another person like this, where both people are choosing to be vulnerable with each other within the safety and beautiful context of a committed marriage. But so many people in our culture and popular culture and society have this idea that actually intimacy and the joy and the fun goes to die at marriage, but it doesn't. You see, marriage isn't meant to take the joy out of sexual intimacy. It's meant to help it reach its greatest potential. Popular thinking has taken the power of sexual intimacy and taken it and used it, that power that helps us grow healthy relationships. Popular culture has used it as a tool for manipulation. One of the examples that the author uses in the book for talking about how pop culture and how this mindset of misusing the power of sexual intimacy happens is like when you take a piece of duct tape, right? You take the duct tape and you use it for the first time. And then you take it off and you try to use it again. And you take it off and you use it again. And you take it off and you use it again. Do you know what happens to the power of that bonding agent on that piece of tape? What happens to it? Each time, it loses its power. Each time, each time, each time. We were not created with this craving so that we would use it around and around and around. We were created with this craving so that the power of sexual intimacy could be let go within the loving relationship of a marriage. God created us to be in monogamous, committed relationships. And God would most prefer us to be in married relationships that continually reveal His love to the world. In these relationships, we are free to be vulnerable, where a lifetime partner cares about us unconditionally with agape love. We've been talking about agape love, right? Unconditional, faithful love. And we do the same for them. That's how it's supposed to be. When we realize that sexual intimacy has a spiritual aspect to it, we'll be able to see an even more satisfying purpose for it within our marriages. That's freeing. There's more purpose to sexual intimacy than just our feelings. There is a spiritual bonding power that comes from it. There was a 2010 study in the Journal of Family Psychology that Hamilton quotes. He said, psychologists found that couples who waited until after their wedding night rated the stability of their relationships. Here's some percentages. 22% of them had higher stability rates. 20% increased in levels of relationship satisfaction. 12% better communication. 15% improved sexual quality. That bonding that can happen. Hamilton also found a connection between those who were in an intimate relationship with God and saw that this value of being intimately connected to God and also intimately connected to another. In 5,000 surveys that he had, there was a large correlation to those who were so in love with Jesus, also being incredibly in love with their spouses. Spiritual intimacy connected to sexual intimacy. Which is why the Apostle Paul writes in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, listen to these words, what he writes. He says, the husband should fulfill his wife's sexual needs. He starts off with the husband. And the wife should fulfill her husband's needs. The wife gives authority over her body to her husband, and the husband gives authority over his body to his wife. Do not deprive each other of sexual relations, unless you both agree to refrain from sexual intimacy for a limited time, so you can give yourselves more completely to prayer. Afterward, you should come together again so that Satan won't be able to tempt you because of your lack of self-control. So there's an interesting story here, right? The city of Corinth was it was a booming city. It was a port city where ships were coming in all the time, and sailors were coming in, and they were looking for ways to kind of distract them and looking for things that can take their mind off of being away from home. In fact, it was thought that one of the temples to one of the Greek gods there had 1,000 temple prostitutes who were there just to meet the needs of these sailors who were there. So in the city of Corinth, sexual immorality was rampant. Everything was happening everywhere and on all types of levels. And in the middle of this kind of situation, it's the kind of situation that, today if you were to watch TV preachers, some of them would be like, God's going to destroy that place. Well, that's how bad it was in that city. But God had a different plan for the people there. In fact, in the middle of all this was a group of people who were following Jesus. And so they wrote a letter to the Apostle Paul, and they wrote him, and basically they were asking him, what do we do in the middle of all this? Is it okay for us to still be sexually intimate with each other and not just for the purpose of having babies? Is that still okay with our spouses? And Paul writes back, yes, absolutely. And here's why. Within the power of a committed marriage relationship that is built upon that agape, that unconditional, faithful love, sexual intimacy can flow naturally. That doesn't mean that it doesn't take work. It doesn't mean that you might need to schedule some different times. It doesn't mean that you're never going to be tired or feel like not doing that. And sometimes you'll need to just be okay with just being with each other. But at the end of the day, when both people are seeking the attitude of Jesus and both see that even in intimacy, you bless each other. You unleash the power of what God created from the very beginning of time. I do want to warn you, though, with that particular text, throughout the centuries, there have been people who have used and abused those words. They have used them to control people. And let me tell you, do not read these words outside of the context of that agape love we talk about. Do not read these words outside of the attitude of Jesus, because when you do, you get into trouble. And sexual intimacy is no longer life-giving, but a weapon of control driven by selfish desire. Outside of the attitude of Jesus, outside of agape love, sexual intimacy can be used as a selfish-driven desire. And Paul would never be okay with that. Anytime anyone ever takes Scripture and uses it in a way that does not line up with the life of Jesus, we should have red flags and go in the opposite direction. You see, I like this right here. Listen, sexual intimacy was created by a loving God to draw us out of ourselves and into lifelong, committed relationships with another human being. It has always been about blessing the other person in marriage. Crickets. I'm going to say it one more time. Sexual intimacy was created by a loving God to draw us out of ourselves and into lifelong, committed relationships with another human being. It has always been about blessing the other person in our marriage. So what do we do if we find ourselves feeling like we don't have anything left to give? I believe in this next statement. God can restore our ability to bond. God can restore our ability to bond. I do not believe that you are a bad person if you've been sexually intimate with someone outside of marriage. You're human. We are all humans with this craving and this gift from God. I believe that God has the power to restore that bond again in your life. Some things I recommend. I recommend counseling. Talking to someone who can help you work through some of the situations and issues that you might be carrying in your life that keep you afraid of this. I highly recommend marriage, because I believe that is what God created, where that power of bonding can be unleashed to its fullest potential. I recommend taking steps now to restore the power of sexual intimacy in your life. Stop sleeping around. Stop looking at porn and allowing those things that cheapen and ruin and put holes in the power of this bonding. Stop allowing it to happen. Stop hurting your chance to experience the power of this gift that God has given you. I don't know all your stories. I know some of your stories. But I do know the story of God. I do know that the story of God is about a God who loves us so much and wants to do everything He can to bring healing to our hearts, even to this area of our lives that is our most vulnerable and most secret and most hidden part of who we are sometimes. He wants to bring healing to that part of us. Whether we're married, in a relationship, or single. But whether or not we really live into this power is up to us. Whether or not we actually live into this power is up to us. Let's stand together. I'm going to ask you to bow your heads and close your eyes. I know we've talked about a heavy topic this morning. Maybe you came here not ready to talk about this subject. But I hope and pray that you'll leave here knowing what God can do in your life, even in this area. So I'm going to ask you some questions, and they're going to be pointed. But every eye is closed in this room. It's just you and God listening for His voice. My first question is this. Have you given your sex life to Jesus? Seriously. Whether you're married, in a relationship, single, have you given that part of your life to Jesus? Have you given your sex life to Jesus? Second, I want to talk about motive for a moment. Is your hunger for sexual intimacy driven by selfless love or selfish love? What controls the cravings that you have? Is it agape love, right? That Jesus love, that unconditional, faithful love? Or something else shaping those cravings in your life? Finally, for every one of us, what is God revealing to you today about this area of your life? Father, I thank you. I thank you for the gift of sexual intimacy. It is such a privilege, God. It's such a beautiful aspect of what it means to be human, to share this with another human. God, I know that in a room like this, some of us have been deeply scarred and hurt. Some of us carry baggage and pain. Some of us have been the person who has inflicted that pain on somebody else. But God, you are calling us to a different way of living. You are calling us out of the shame and out of the shadows. You are the God who can restore the power of bonding that you created every one of us with. So God, I pray that we would say yes to you. For some of us, we might need to step out a little bit further in our marriage with our spouse. Some of us need the courage to have real, honest conversations with each other. All of us, God, need your attitude and your heart and your strength to see each other through your eyes. But at the end of the day, all of us in this room can say, thank you for loving us first. For it's in your name I pray. Amen.